Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel. How are you doing? I hope you're doing really well, and loads of love to each and every one of you. I'm doing fine, thank you very much, and I hope you're going to get that lovely drink, whatever it is that you enjoy drinking, whether it's hot cocoa, whether it's Irish coffee, whatever it is, lemonade, red wine, white wine, you go and get it, because I've got a fabulous story for you tonight that you're just going to love. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, I have sat on my story for far too long, incubating it much like a hen on an egg, and hoping it would never hatch, for I never thought I'd ever speak of it again. It is not a story that I've ever shared with anyone, not because I give a toss about being ridiculed by strangers having a laugh at my expense, for I don't care about all that stuff. Never have and never will. But some things happen in our lives that are deeply personal to us, and these secrets become such an intrinsic part of our beings, much like the rings on the trunk of a tree, denoting its age. And sometimes those secrets go down to the grave with us when we have departed from this earth. However, I think this extraordinary story about a mysterious forbidden love, a Bigfoot and a tragedy is well worth telling and deserves to be brought out into the full light of day. My name is Pierce, and I grew up in the North American countryside, but I would prefer not to be specific about the geographical coordinates, only for the protection of my sister Evelyn, who was not eager for me to share our story in the first place, unless, of course, I kept her out of the picture as much as I possibly could. We both grew up in a gorgeous, old-fashioned, vintage-style double-storey farmhouse with my parents that had belonged to several generations on my mother's side of the family. She had inherited this house from a great-uncle of hers who had always regarded her as much like his daughter. My mother was a country girl at heart, so when she married my father, who came from a long line of cattle ranchers, it was hardly a surprise that our farm was finally transformed into a sizable cattle ranch, and my father purchased the adjoining farm to enhance its size so that it blossomed and flourished into a sizable ranch. As young teenagers in the early 80s, my parents gave us free rein to do as we pleased, as in those days people were far less worried about crime than they are now. We could literally cycle outside our farm gate, down some of those rugged, gravelly country roads to our heart's content, and go exploring. In truth, we loved nothing better than riding past cows and horses grazing in the rich, undulating, luxuriant, emerald-green pastures, while the soft shafts of sunlight bespeckled our faces with a cosy warmth. My parents didn't want us to prospect or investigate the old abandoned farmhouse further along the country track, situated at the end of a large cul-de-sac, where it stood like a lonely, old, neglected lady, covered in cobwebs and dust, abandoned and forsaken by all those who had loved her once. For indeed she was a sorrowful, woe-begotten sight, with white wooden windows falling apart and crumbling at the seams, and rambunctious creepers curling, twining, and pushing forcefully through the cracks with a pertinacious vigour and enthusiasm of note. The faded white brick walls were now peeling, and the dog-eared roof looked like it had seen much better days. The house had been pretty once, of that I am sure, for despite the passing of years, the remnants of its charming character were fighting through the degraded, run-down remains of this decrepit building, crying out to be seen, almost as if to say, "I really am worth saving. Please don't overlook me." This once imposing farmhouse, only a shadow of its former glory, appeared to be surrounded by the prettiest statuesque woodland trees, from oaks to maples and hickories. Then close to the house was an enchanting creek that was arched by a decaying bridge that was in even more appalling state than the house itself. If you think for a moment that my sister and I were obedient to my father asking us to avoid the old abandoned farmhouse, you would be very wrong. We were not rebellious or incompliant by any manner of means, but growing up when my parents told us to keep our hands out of the cookie jar, it would seem that the jar of cookies became utterly irresistible. And just like bees to a honey pot, our willpower completely waned, and we couldn't but help ourselves from diving in and stealing a few cookies. It would have worked so much better for my parents to use reverse psychology and to tell us to spend our days at the neglected farmhouse or to eat as many cookies as we liked. And I guarantee you this, they would have certainly lost their appeal. One day my sister and I wilfully defied all our promises, and we surreptitiously hid our bicycles behind a couple of thorny briars to ensure that no one could possibly know we were at this farmhouse, because we knew if our father found out about our impudent disobedience, we would be in a whole heap of trouble, and it wasn't pretty when my dad lost his temper. We cautiously ventured towards the old farmhouse, and for a moment we stood still, surveying the building intently, for despite its appalling state, it stood proud and tall, refusing to be ashamed or humiliated by her dilapidated, ramshackle state. "It's so sad," I said to my sister, eyeing the farmhouse. "At one time this place was quite magnificent, I'm sure of that. I would buy it myself in a heartbeat if I had the money. Why would someone just forsake it like this? It seems almost cruel." "It's only a house, Piers," said my sister. "Why do you have to be so dramatic about bricks and mortar, for goodness sake? Mummy told me that the people who lived here all of a sudden just moved to New York, and their son joined the Navy. Everyone at the time thought it was very strange, because the family was exceedingly happy and very loved by the community. The father ran a cattle ranch here, but he sold off the large herd and abandoned the land just like that. I mean, who does that?" "But why?" I said. "Why would they allow their house to fall to rack and ruin like this? It seems nonsensical to me. They could have at least sold it, and they would have got a pretty penny for it, I'm sure." "Don't ask me," said Evelyn. "People can do the strangest things sometimes, but I'm sure they must have had their good reasons. Maybe they were planning to come back, but just never did." As we entered the forsaken house, I was surprised to see that it was still furnished, and it would seem thick layers of dust and silken cobwebs swathed the furnishings with their lustrous, feathery fibres, and much of the once very opulent upholstery had been ravaged and devoured by moths, and was now almost completely threadbare. The kitchen fridge contained bottles of pickles, with best before dates in the early 70s. Everything smelt musty like mildew or damp, and the old wooden floors buckled beneath our feet, creaking as we cautiously glided up the staircase to the upstairs bedrooms, where the large beds were still dressed in their sheets, that were now covered in thick layers of dirt, where we could see the footprints of raccoons that had clearly explored the house on an investigation of their own. I discovered a whole stack of old birthday cards lying in a wastepaper basket in the main bedroom, and some of them seemed to have been shredded, almost like someone had wanted to dispose of them very quickly. One card had escaped the shredding, and I curiously opened it and began to read it out aloud to my sister. "To my beloved, precious sister, you are the light of my life and the joy in my heart and the purpose of my every breath. Have a wonderful birthday, sweetie pie. All my love, your devoted brother Paul." "That's way too over the top," I said. "I do love you, Evelyn, but I would never describe you as the light of my life. That's way too intense for me." "Thanks a lot," said Evelyn. "So what am I to you then?" "Well, you're not the light of my life, that's for sure. I hope that position will be reserved for my wife one day, but you are one of my best friends in the whole world." "Thanks," said Evelyn. "That actually means a lot. You're also my best friend, but light of my life, you most certainly are not," she teased. "It's weird," I said. "This birthday card kind of creeps me out a bit. It's what you'd expect to write to your lover, not a sister, don't you think?" "Maybe they were just exceptionally close," said Evelyn. "That's what I concluded," I said, "but not close in a natural or normal way, I'm inclined to think. I don't know what it was about this mysterious, alluring farmhouse, but it would seem that my sister and I were so fascinated and intrigued by it, and were drawn to it regularly, as if in some way we had an invisible connection to the bricks and mortar of the house, or the house in some way had a kind of magical magnetic hold over us. One day, as we were exploring the abandoned farmhouse, we could hear footsteps coming towards the house. It was odd because we hadn't heard a car driving down the long gravelly drive, with the treading sound of crushed stones usually being heard so eloquently as it swivelled or braked in the parking bay. "Hide," I said to my sister. "Someone's coming. Quick! I think it's Dad. If he sees us here, we're dead," I said, moving my hand quickly across my throat to indicate a slit throat. "But where can we hide?" whispered my sister, looking around the bedroom with a frantic expression on her face. She did not fancy facing the wrath of my father, who could bellow like an ox. "Behind the sofa," I said, and we bolted behind the sizable piece of furniture, our hearts thundering through our chests and our brows sweating profusely. "Please, God, don't let Dad find us here," I thought. "He'll kill us." I did not mean that literally, of course, but my father was not a man whose feathers you intentionally ruffled. That is, if you did not want to get on his wrong side, of course. We could hear these heavy, cloddish, thumping footsteps climbing the steps rather clumsily, and a male voice kept saying, "Damn! Damn!" I imagine the stranger had managed to get their ungainly shoe trapped into a warped piece of the staircase, which was exceedingly easy to do. And this person, whoever they were, appeared to be as graceless and blundering as a bull in a china shop. "It's not Daddy," I whispered to my sister. "It's someone else." Whoever this oafish person was, they appeared to be dragging something up the staircase with heavy hands, making several grunts and groans in the process, as if it was a laborious job. But the staircase was tricky, given its decrepit state, and so mastering it was tantamount to balancing on a tightrope, and carrying something, whether heavy or light, was in fact a monumental, arduous and gruelling challenge. Whoever this man was, he appeared to lift a long vertical-shaped bubble-wrap parcel into his arms that had been taped together with duct tape. We could hear his footsteps entering the bedroom, and then he threw the mysterious parcel onto the bed, where it bounced for a second and finally settled on the mattress. My sister kept poking me because I was having a very good look at the stranger, and she was absolutely terrified that I would be observed by him. I noted he was quite short, with a slim build, and he looked like he was in his 30s. We could hear the sound of duct tape being pulled away from the bubble wrap, and the bubble wrap was thrown onto the ground like old Christmas paper, while the whole room was enveloped in a vile, putrid smell that was so disgusting my sister and I were trying desperately hard not to throw up or gag, but after a while, I'm glad to say, the smell settled. Whatever the man had brought into the room, it was clearly something that was dead. At first I thought he'd brought an animal from a taxidermist or something, as they can smell rather funky. All of a sudden the man began to talk. I think he was lying on the bed next to the open parcel and holding it closely to his body, which was disgusting, because whatever it was, it most certainly did not smell great. The man began to talk lovingly to the parcel. "Why, oh why, sister, did you make me do this? You know how much I loved you. We were meant to be together forever. You agreed to that. Remember our pinky promise. I always told you that if I could not have you, no one could. Why did it have to end this way? Things could have been so different for the both of us. We had our dreams. Don't you remember our dreams? But you ruined everything. Why did you have to listen to Mum? Why did you have to listen to Dad? They didn't understand our love. Why did you listen to them? So what if we couldn't have had our own children together? Big deal. We could have adopted or worked out some other plan. We could have disappeared into the sunset together. No one would have ever found us. You knew that I was never, ever going to let you marry that loser. That loser. Oh, that big loser. I wouldn't let that happen. Not in a million years. If I can't have you, then no one can. Remember, that was our deal." We could hear the man sobbing and sobbing for a long time, until he had soaked the dusty sheets with his salty tears. The man then finally composed himself and gathered the bubble wrap and pieces of duct tape in his hands and walked rather precariously down the decrepit staircase, emitting a few more damns in the process as invariably he kept getting his boots stuck in the buckling wood. Finally, we could hear a car engine starting up, and the car wheels crunching the pebbles beneath the tyres, until finally it had driven away. My sister and I were so astonished. We could see on the bed there was a body of a young woman that almost appeared mummified, as the skin was so tightly attached to the face that it had an appearance much like tanned leather, and the body looked shriveled, withered, and dried up, like a sun-dried wrinkled prune. It was clear to see that the young woman, who looked like a leather doll, had been dead for a very long time. Luckily, she did not smell as bad as she could have done, as her dehydrated body was quite literally fossilized, like a hard stone, which meant it may have been kept in a very dry, closed environment for quite some while. "What the heck?" I said to my sister, looking at her in outright horror. "Do you realise what's going on here? I think that young man used to live in this house, and this dead body is his sister. I think he was so in love with her, and he couldn't bear for her to marry anyone else, so he killed her and brought her back to his childhood home." "Why would he bring her back here?" asked Evelyn. "That's completely crazy." "I don't know, but he clearly was madly in love with her," I said. "But why would he kill his sister?" protested Evelyn. "That doesn't make any sense at all." Love can do strange things to people, and even make them behave completely out of character. It might explain why this whole family abandoned their home. "Think about it." "What do you mean?" asked my sister. "Well, supposing the parents discovered what was actually going on under their own roof. I mean, consider all the ramifications. Think about all those shredded birthday cards in the bin that someone angrily ripped apart, possibly in disgusted revulsion, which may have been a dismayed, very aggrieved parent, appalled to see that their own son was writing lovey-dovey stuff to his own sister. I think the parents must have been completely devastated to discover that their own two children were in love with each other. How did they handle such a horrifying revelation? It would have been a shameful disgrace for a family to have to contend with such an insidious, dark secret that literally had the potential to rip the family apart. "Oh, I see what you're getting at," said my sister. "I think I know why they left this house. They probably persuaded the son to go to the Navy to get him out of the way, and as far from the sister as possible. And then the rest of the family decided to move to New York, possibly hoping that the son would not find their brand new address, as they wanted to separate their children from each other for as long as possible. They possibly hoped that the distance between their two children would bring them both to their senses and encourage them to start dating other people." "Good point, Evelyn. You're on to something there, I think. I'm sure the brother returned from the Navy and discovered to his horror that his beloved, precious sister, the love of his life, was getting married to someone else. He couldn't bear the idea of her belonging to another man, so he managed to meet up with her in secret and probably tried to persuade her to run away with him, and she refused to go, so he killed her." "That's exactly what I think," said my sister. "Jealousy. It's a lethal killer." As my sister and I were locked in a deep discussion over this mysterious, idiosyncratic and unorthodox case, all of a sudden we heard a loud thumping noise, and we were convinced that the young man was coming back, although I had not heard a car engine purring down the driveway, nor had I heard gravel being crunched under heavy tyres, or car doors being opened and slammed. But who else could it be? Perhaps he decided to come back and pick up the corpse after all. "Quick, hide!" I whispered to my sister. "Quick!" Whoever was coming up the steps had a very noticeable, hefty, but smooth, fluent and springy footfall. And whoever they were, they seemed unusually nimble and agile on their feet, as if the dilapidated staircase was of little consequence or hindrance to them. The next thing we knew was that this huge presence burst forth into the room, and even hiding behind the large sofa, my sister and I could perceive this formidable, intimidating aura literally envelop the entire room in a powerful, daunting and imposing energy of the likes that I've never beheld before. Even the room was filled with the warm, nutty aroma and buttery vanilla notes I have often discerned with acorn and oak trees. I could feel my body heating up as the sweat began to pour down my face, and my heart was thundering violently through my chest like a heavy drum. I could feel, sense, and even taste danger in every fibre of my being. I was almost too terrified to take a peek at this strange, extraordinary, mysterious entity in the room, but my curiosity overcame my rising trepidation, and I peeked over the settee, and what I saw was so outlandish and nonsensical that it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up on end, and I broke out into goosebumps all over my skin. What on earth was this strange critter, I wondered, for in all my born days I had never encountered something like this before. It was easily about 7 foot tall and 600 pounds, with a large barrel chest and very powerful shoulders, and what was incredible was the creature was covered from top to bottom in chestnut-coloured hair, and based on the thickness and texture of the hair from the back view, it could have easily been confused with a bear, but a bear it most certainly was not. I could discern that the creature was built very much like a human being, but with gargantuan, giant-like proportions. Its overlong, strong arms and the distinct arched shape of its head were about the only features that differed from being entirely human. But minus those discrepancies, the creature was almost perfectly human, although at this stage I hadn't observed the face. It appeared to be hovering over the corpse of the young girl, and was very vocal in expressing his apparent dismay and consternation. It began to almost howl in despairing dismay, and even began beating its chest, as if the death of this withered corpse had caused him some personal distress. If I had not known any better, I could swear that this creature had known the young woman in life, for he was exhibiting the very signs of someone experiencing a desperate, overwhelming grief upon hearing some tragic news. The critter lifted up the hardened corpse and threw it over his shoulders like a sack of potatoes, and was about to turn around when my sister unexpectedly coughed. In that moment I wanted to throttle her, never more so than I did just then, as we were sitting ducks for this treacherous predator. The creature looked stunned and bewildered, and immediately glided over to where we were hiding, pulling back the couch and sliding it across the floor to expose our cowering, pathetic bodies. In that moment the fear I felt was overwhelming, and I was so frozen in terror as the creature studied us curiously through his deep-set dark eyes. I think Evelyn and I were the last things he had expected to see, and his expression seemed nonplussed, as if he was saying, "What are you doing here, and who on earth are you?" The critter did not display any animosity or aggression towards us, but in no way did that reassure or comfort our fear, as we were overcome with such a senseless, tangible terror that it seemingly incapacitated our ability to move. I just stared at the creature with eyes as round as saucers and my jaw hanging wide open. My sister was equally as debilitated and immobilized by what we were both perceiving. For this creature, whatever in God's name it was, did not conform to our understanding of the natural world. It was like some strange, spurious beast had literally entered our reality from some other unknown dimension or open portal. But this was not the case, for this prodigious, uncustomary creature was as real as you or I. The creature turned around with the dead corpse still dangling over his shoulder like a stiff rag doll. He dashed down the stairs and glided out of the house and was gone from our sight. "What the heck?" I said to my sister. "Did you see that?" "Did I see that?" said my sister. "Are you kidding? Of course I saw that. What was it? And why did it want that dead, dried-up old corpse? I mean, it's hardly edible. It would be like gnarling on leather, cardboard or stone. I mean, if he tried to eat her." "I don't think that's his intention," I piped. "Did you not see how gutted he was about her dead body? It was almost as if he knew the girl personally, as if he'd had some kind of friendship with her. He appeared distressed by her death. This whole situation is completely bizarre. If I didn't know any better, I would assume we were playing a part in a movie." As you can imagine, my sister and I were dumbfounded by our unprecedented, momentous experience, as we could not comprehend what we had both seen.
we had observed a dead body being dumped on a bed by a young girl's own brother, who we believed had killed his sister in an act of passionate jealousy, as he could not bear for her to be without another man. Maybe he wanted her body to be recovered at his old family home, so the family could have a decent burial. But it would seem that the epic, anomalous creature we had encountered had other ideas in mind for the corpse, as he had glided off with it in his arms. We naturally did not tell our parents what we had seen at the abandoned house, because we knew we would be in serious trouble for going there in the first place, and besides, I seriously doubt they would have ever believed our outrageous, implausible and fantastical claims or allegations about a hairy humanoid stealing the dead corpse from the farmhouse. Every way you looked at it, our story seemed preposterous and spectacularly bizarre. One day I actually heard from my mother that the 2 children who'd grown up in the old abandoned farmhouse had been registered as missing, presumed dead. No one knew what had happened to the young girl, but her brother on one of his Navy missions had disappeared off the ship, and many believed he'd jumped into the sea, as he was described as suffering from bouts of deep depression and grievous despair that no amount of medication could suppress. It was weird to think that my sister and I were privy to what really happened to the young girl, but we never ever told anyone. We could only conclude that the brother, in his remorseful grief about what he'd done to his sister, could not live with the guilt any more, and had chosen to end his own life. It really was a tragic love story of 2 people who could not be together as lovers because they were siblings with an unsanctioned, taboo and prohibited love. Fast forward to the late 90s, and I was now a married man with 2 young children of my own, and believe it or not, I decided to buy the old farmhouse that had stood neglected for so long. Even my wife, who was not privy to the story connected to the old house, could see its hidden potential and promise. "It's a real beauty," she had said, "and once this place is fixed up, this house will be a showstopper," and believe me, she was not wrong. Before long we'd restored the old abandoned farmhouse back to its former glory, and it was like a bedraggled, dying rose that began to blossom and bud again. Once again she stood proud and tall in the countryside, knowing that she was every bit as magnificent as she had been in her former days when the first bricks of her foundations were ever laid. All the peeling paint and cracked walls were no longer, and were replaced with a rich gleaming coat of fresh white paint, and the old decrepit wooden windows had been replaced with brand new ones. Our fields had been enriched with healthy soil, and we had cattle now grazing the rich verdant pastures, and even the little creek was now covered with a brand new arch bridge. Many locals in the area who observed our brand new home regretted that they had not snapped up the property for themselves, for they could see she was an exceptional home. Dare I say, even my father was impressed. "Son, you have done incredibly well for yourself," he had said. "I had my misgivings about this place, but I can see I was very wrong." From the moment we moved into our home, we could hear ethereal female laughter, but we could never determine where it came from. We still hear it to this very day. But on one occasion, when it was very late in the evening, I saw a pretty girl who was wearing bell-bottom jeans and a loose cotton shirt running down our staircase. I promise you that she was so real that I actually thought I was seeing things. She looked up and smiled directly at me, with sparkling blue eyes, and then she ran outside the house. I immediately ran after her into the open meadow where the cattle were grazing, who looked up at me in surprise, wondering what their owner was doing, running in the middle of the meadow like a bat out of hell. For this girl, she ran faster than the wind. But then she turned around, glanced at me over her shoulder, smiled at me, and vanished before my very eyes. The next thing I knew was I was surrounded by several inquisitive cattle, eager to know what the heck was going on, as they were exceedingly inquisitive critters. I was soon to realise that the ghost of the young girl had been seen by many in my family, including our local electrician, who was visiting our house once and said to me, "You have a pretty daughter out there. It's a long time since I've seen anybody wear bell-bottom jeans before. Maybe she will renew the old fashion." I thought better than to tell him that he'd actually seen a ghost. I do not get the sense she's trapped here, but I know who she is, and I think she's happy. It's her laughter that I hear, and I think it holds many happy memories for her. This home, I mean. So there you are. That's my story. What a wonderful story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Until next time, goodbye and good night.